To create cataclysmic scenes and apocalyptic events, disaster movies need a lot of CGI, practical effects, manpower, time, and most importantly, money. In this video, we're going to take a look behind the scenes of a number of disaster movies and how the doomsday scenes were pulled off. Let's go.
It's pre-recorded. I narrated it myself.
First on the list is Titanic, which of course chronicles the sinking of the supposedly unsinkable ship in 1912. And it's at the time cutting-edge technology still holds up to this day. This is in part down to the $200 million spent on the movie, which means the movie actually cost more than the actual Titanic did, and the fact that director James Cameron spoke to real Titanic survivors and took 12 dives to the actual remains of the ship. The scenes set in 1912, which is basically the whole movie except for the present-day scenes and the opening and ending credits, have a total length of 2 hours and 40 minutes, which, crazy fact, is the exact time it took for the Titanic to sink. An even crazier fact is that the real collision with the iceberg reportedly lasted 37 seconds, which is exactly how long the collision scene is in the movie. As CG was still in its infancy, Cameron had to rely on practical effects to pull off the sinking of the giant vessel.
Surely you understand that on any substantial construction project, particularly one of this size, there are inevitable delays.
Approximately 120 tons of water were released for Eric Braeden's final scene, which Braeden said was the most terrifying experience of his life. Most of the ocean that extras were jumping into was only 3 feet deep, except for a very small area that was much deeper around the set. Debris, like deck chairs and life jackets, were placed in the water to mark exactly where they could safely jump. Once they jumped, they'd swim to the shallow section and then crouch to give the illusion of being in deep water. Speaking of water, in the scene where Rose is looking through the corridors for Jack, the water used was actually from the Pacific Ocean, and it was so cold that Kate Winslet's reaction was 100% genuine. The post-sinking scenes were shot in a 350,000-gallon or 1,300,000-liter tank where the frozen corpses were created by applying powder on the actors that then crystallized when exposed to water, and then wax was applied to hair and clothes to create a wet look. Of course, we couldn't talk about Titanic without mentioning the famous "I'm flying, Jack" scene. The sunset in the scene was actually real and not CGI, and the set had been purposefully built at a seaside location to capture natural light, and 8 days of filming were available to capture the bow shot kissing scene. Roland Emmerich's movie 2012 is based on the idea that the end of the Mayan calendar on December 21st, 2012 predicted a global apocalypse.
Try to imagine the ultimate nightmare, and that won't come close.
To bring the director's vision to life, more than 100 artists were brought in to create 2012's 1,300 visual effects shots, which included volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, floods, and of course the massive earthquake that rips through California. For that 3-minute sequence, VFX artists built a 3D photorealistic version of several city blocks using 60,000 high-dynamic images as a reference. After that, they then made every mailbox, tree, and building shake and crumble. On set, Emmerich filmed the actors in front of a blue screen, placing them on a shaky floor, which in actuality is an 8,000 square foot steel platform on airbags. Then, special effects coordinators jiggled the bags with pneumatic pumps to inspire authentic reactions from the actors. Now, speaking of Emmerich's disaster movies, for The Day After Tomorrow, they had at least 1,000 digital artists work on the movie, and the film understandably leans heavily on CG. The opening shot of the ice shelf is completely CGI, while the breath appearing out of the actors' mouths in the cold scenes was all added in post. A majority of the scenes were actually filmed on sound stages in Montreal before it went to the special effects wizards who took a year and a half to create the VFX, such as crumbling the Hollywood sign. Quaid and Gyllenhaal did most of their scenes between September 2002 and January 2003 in Montreal, which just so happened to be one of the coldest winters ever, and if the real snow wasn't enough, truckloads of fake snow made of paper and blown at high speeds with giant wind machines was then added to the scenes. Also, fun fact, reportedly, Trey Parker and Matt Stone managed to get their hands on a copy of this movie's script during its pre-production. The two even planned to secretly shoot the same movie, but with puppets instead of actors, saying the lines word for word, and then release it on the same day. However, the duo abandoned these plans after their lawyer convinced them that such a movie would never get released. Moving on to The Impossible, which starred Ewan McGregor, Naomi Watts, and Tom Holland. Yeah, I forgot that too. In the scene where the tsunami hits the resort, they could only shoot it once, as it would have cost too much money to rebuild the set. To shoot this scene, the crew filmed partially on location at the actual resort, which has since been rebuilt, while for the tsunami destruction scenes, a scaled model of the resort was used. It took production a year to put together the 10-minute sequence and the moment the wave came crashing down.
To making it count.
To shoot the underwater scenes, Naomi Watts was strapped in a rotating chair, but disaster nearly struck while filming when Watts couldn't hold her breath any longer and she gave the stop sign, but instead of stopping due to a technical error, the chair started spinning the other way around. To add to the realism of the movie, many of the extras were actual survivors of the tsunami, and the family on which the story is based were present during the whole shooting process. For The Rock's San Andreas, production used over 1,300 visual effects, but despite the high VFX count, the cast actually did a lot of their own stunts. In the first 15 minutes of the film, Johnson rappels out of a helicopter that's at least 150 feet off the ground to rescue a girl that's in a car suspended off of a cliff face that's 50 feet off the ground. When talking about it, director Brad Peyton said there was a little bit of a challenge that the script, the story, and the style in which we wanted to shoot it posed to the cast, which I think they delivered on in spades. I wanted to get Dwayne in the backseat and chase him with a 150-foot techno crane and not cut. I wanted the audience to know that they are seeing Dwayne Johnson do this. This isn't a trick, there's no editing, this is him really doing it. But having someone as valuable as The Rock do his own stunts can also be stressful. As he said, I remember in Australia seeing Dwayne practice that, which makes your heart palpitate because you're like, please do not fall right now. We need to roll cameras, sir. During the filming of Armageddon, the cast and crew reportedly worked around $19 billion worth of equipment, including a real oil rig and real space shuttle. In fact, the shuttle launches were filmed for real. Disney was allowed to put cameras, about 16 of them, all over the place during the launch, and the camera on the launch pad was shaken so hard that all the screws fell out of the lens, and it had to be returned to Panavision in a box of pieces, which they eventually had to put back together. The film crew were also allowed to shoot sequences at the top of a real launch pad with an actual space shuttle docked to it. The only condition was that they not step into the shuttle itself. But Ben Affleck broke these rules by stepping inside the orbiter for a brief moment before NASA technicians ordered him out of the spacecraft.
It's just one guy talking here, but I gotta tell you, that's a very poor attitude on your part.
Also, the scene at the crashed Independence was the first night of filming, and Affleck, Stormare, and Michael Clark Duncan were basically used to test how the spacesuits looked and fit before Bruce Willis, who started late on the film and was apparently very nervous about the suits, came to the set. However, shooting that scene was not easy, and according to Bay, nothing was working that night. In fact, at one point, while he was filming Affleck's character from a distance, he kept seeing him lean over as if he was looking for something. When Bay yelled cut and asked Affleck what he was doing, he found out that the air supply to Affleck's suit had completely shut off, and the actor was looking for any kind of rock to bust his helmet open.
I've got to inform the president.
Also, speaking of Affleck and Bay, after shooting a close-up of Affleck, Bay reportedly said that the actor had baby teeth, so he sent Affleck to the dentist chair 8 hours a day for a week to get the teeth you see in the film now, with his new chompers apparently costing $20,000. For the movie Noah, the flooding in the Ark obviously played a big part of the movie, and a blend of practical effects and VFX were used for it. According to Emma Watson, the Ark was built to scale on Long Island, New York, while for interior shots, a smaller version was used. Now, in regards to the amount of VFX in the movie, Darren Aronofsky said he and his crew had to create an entire animal kingdom, using no real animals in the production, but instead slightly tweaked versions of real creatures. Industrial Light and Magic, who have worked on the likes of Star Wars, said their work on this movie was the most complicated rendering in the company's history, which is kind of crazy when you think about the other movies they worked on. For the disaster movie Pompeii, the production wanted it to be as real as possible with the use of built sets and little green screen effects. Titanic was a massive influence for Pompeii, and especially in how it drew audiences first from its simple, compelling story of forbidden love and class differences with a disaster in the backdrop. The film set out to be as historically accurate as possible, particularly in its coverage of the eruption of Vesuvius.
We gotta blow it, and we gotta blow it now.
So the production shot in the real Pompeii for 6 days so they could film the base of the real mountain and then amplify it with CG. However, the majority of the film was shot on Toronto sound stages, and they did film outside the city for 2 weeks for a Celtic village scene. During production, they estimated 45 to 50 minutes of digital shots were used in the film, including tidal waves, earthquakes, blowing up the mountain, ash, a tsunami, and more. The movie's director, Paul W.S. Anderson, said, "I wanted a believable, historical world. I think for the disaster to work and the drama to work, you really need to feel like you're really in that world. I really wanted to build as much of Pompeii as possible." And finally, we couldn't do this list without mentioning everyone's favorite disaster movie of all time, Sharknado. The movie was shot in just 18 days, most of which were bright and sunny, meaning all the rain and bad weather had to be created through a combination of rain towers, fans, and digital effects. Also, the flooded interior house sequence was shot in a pool on set and filled with freezing cold water that left the cast shivering. And a lot of the principal photography had to come to a halt as the cast and crew kept getting seasick.